Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over broken access control and how to find this within APIs. So first, what is broken access control? Well, broken access control is a vulnerability that allows unauthorized users to access, modify, or delete data they shouldn't have access to. Understanding this vulnerability is extremely important because it opens you up to a lot of different vulnerabilities. This is kind of like a bigger category of multiple vulnerabilities, which we'll get into right now. So these are the different types of broken access control you can have. So first being vertical access, then horizontal, and then unrestricted resource access. So for vertical access issues, these are things such as when a lower privilege user is able to gain unauthorized access or to these resources, functionality, or data that is only meant for higher privilege roles. So if a regular user or a guest is able to get to a functionality of an admin, that's privilege escalation. And this is tied back to when there are misconfigurations within role-based access control. And a question that you could ask during this time or when you're looking for this is, who should be able to do this action? So you kind of have to create a mind map of the different access, which we'll get into later. But this is just to keep in mind to ask that question. Who should be able to do this is very important. Next is horizontal access issues. So this is when users on a specific platform or application are able to perform actions that are for other users on that same privilege level. So say for instance, user A views user B's data by changing the parameter like a user ID. The most common form of this horizontal access control failure are IDORs, which is an insecure direct object reference, which we will talk separately in another video, but also go into detail about in a little bit. A good thing to look out when you're hunting for horizontal access is to test both the APIs, but also the URLs for these vulnerabilities, because these numerical IDs can be hidden within the response or the URL. Lastly is unrestricted resource access, and this happens when you can access files, directories, or other resources that should be restricted. So for this, you would be using tools that do brute forcing like dirbuster, gobuster, or ffuff to identify hidden endpoints or these files that you're not supposed to have access to. So a real world example of this is if you have access to a URL, say backup.sql, and you download the database and it contains sensitive information that's critical to the company, then that's a unrestricted access issue. So the biggest thing that you want to focus on here is looking for unauthorized access to restricted areas like those files, directories, or tools. And then another big thing is information disclosure. So are you revealing any sensitive information that attackers can use for further exploitation is what you want to keep in mind. Next, there's going to be 4 steps to go over a base methodology for hunting for broken access control. So first is going to be to determine those actions. So you want to start by mapping the application's functionality, and this is kind of, you want to think of it as a blueprint for each role, which is like that mind map that I was talking about. And this is where you want to write down or document what each role is supposed to do. Next is actually to detect the user roles. So this is the most critical step because access control is always role dependent. So this is when you want to be asking those questions: who can perform what, who is supposed to perform what, and this is when you'll really start getting into breaking down the logic of the application. Next, you want to actually find the misconfigurations within the roles or the access control. So you can use tools like Burp Suite to intercept these requests, and then look at the IDs, object IDs, or permissions within those requests and see if you can tamper with them. So an example of this would be using a regular user's token to access admin functionalities, and then that right there is a misconfiguration within the user token. Lastly, you want to report these disclosures ethically and responsible as always, but here is when writing clear reports really helps the companies, because access control can be hard to envision without concrete. So you want to make sure that your report is legible and really breaks down what logic you are going against or circumventing. Now I've prepared a few case studies to go over these different types of broken access control, and these are actual vulnerabilities that I've found in the wild, either on bug bounty programs or applications that I'm helping test their security for development. So case study number 1, this was in a new AI app, and I was able to proxy my traffic from my iOS device and review how the API was working. And after a little bit of testing, I noticed that most of the fields within the API could be modified by the user. This would allow people to impersonate different roles within this application. So I could write notes as the system or as an admin compared to just a normal user, which would throw off the users. And obviously here it fails to enforce the restrictions of who's actually an author, and obviously the user should not be able to impersonate another author or the system unless it was explicitly authorized by the developers, which it was not. I submitted this report to them via email, and now we're collaborating on the security of the app. Next is a privilege escalation vulnerability that I found in a management software. The privilege escalation happened within the invitation page, so only admins were allowed to invite users, but as a presenter, which is a lower level of access, I was able to hit the same endpoint and still send the invitation even though I don't have administrative permissions. And as you can see down here in this corner, you must be an administrator to access this area, but also at the same time that one invitation was sent. So here I was able to take advantage of the privilege escalation to invite unauthorized users, which could allow for attackers to maintain access or allow unauthorized people to access this data. So in general, it's just compromising the integrity of the system. Lastly, we have a IDOR in an API which dealt with chats. So I was able to change the user ID parameter, which was in the request, just to make another point, to not only look in the URLs but also the requests, because a lot of the times the APIs are communicating through request bodies as well. Here I was able to delete any person's message history by simply changing the user ID, and here the impact was unauthorized clearing of chat history, which obviously violates the user's privacy and trust within the platform, which is another big thing to keep in mind, that these companies are trying to provide a secure and trustworthy application for their users, not only from a security standpoint, but also from an overall ecosystem standpoint. If users know that your application is unsecure, they won't use it, and then a company can lose money because you're losing a user base based on that idea they have of you. Also, the data loss. Here, users would lose access to the information that was stored in their chat history, and for this specific application, I won't get into too much detail, but it was dealing with a lot of kind of critical numbers. So if this data was gone, some users would not be happy, therefore leading to that discouragement again for using that platform. So there's multiple ways to think about these logic issues, one from a privacy and security standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, that you can ultimately affect these companies from multiple angles, which increases your impact.